The results are in, and they're not what you'd expect. Linguists have cut through the noise to find out what makes a language sing in the ear or pose an assault on the senses. What's the final verdict? Well, they're going to tell us. Is Italian the ideal and German just a bit gross? Is the sound of Hindi heavenly and Mandarin a melodic mess? Find out now in another RobWords. By the way, this video's sponsor is italki, and that turned out to be really helpful, as you'll find out. Google "what's the world's ugliest language" and the same usual suspects come up over and over. Ditto if you ask what's the most beautiful one. But read a little deeper and the reasons that are given are hardly scientific. So that's something that this guy and a couple of colleagues at Lund University in Sweden decided to change.
What's up with languages? Why do we find that some languages just seem to be more liked than others?
Basically, what Niklas and his team wanted to work out was whether there was anything about the sound of the languages people say are beautiful or ugly that makes them beautiful or ugly. And it seems like there is. Tolkien wanted Elvish to sound lovely, and so it sounded like this. Whereas Star Trek's malevolent Klingons sound like this. What was that? But are those sounds associated with beauty or ugliness because of how they land in the ear? Or is there another reason?
Obviously, there are some, prejudices when it comes to these kinds of things. At least people say that if a language has a lot of sounds which are produced in the back of the mouth, like h and stuff like that, then you find them, oh, that's not going to sound very nice. Like you would say that German is ugly, but Italian is beautiful, or German is ugly and French is beautiful. But the interesting thing is that many of those sounds that you focus on, like these throat sounds, for example, in French you have it all the time with the R's, right? Like a r. And that's considered beautiful anyways. And then you have the German one with a h, and that's considered not beautiful. So there's something more going on here. So we try to put all these things to the side and just see what we could get out. It's very explorative, this study.
So stay tuned to find out how they did that. But first, let's look at those preconceptions. Why does Italian, for example, have this reputation for being gorgeous? Well, I've been seeking out my own answers by speaking to Italian teacher Daya, and
say hello.
After showing off my cat,
Hello.
I got her view.
One of the things that people say perhaps drives people towards Italian as being a beautiful language is its association with certain art forms.
Yes, definitely.
Do you think that's true? Is it because we're used to hearing opera in Italian, maybe?
Italy has a really, really rich history with arts, culture, cuisine, and it's associated also with music because many words in the musical speech, for example, are in Italian. For example, veloce, lento, alto, and most of my students are like, oh, I already know that word. And I'm like, yes, definitely, if you're studying music.
So the point is, it's what we associate the language with that maybe influences how attractive we find it. I reckon that's probably the case with German too, which I'll get onto in a sec. By the way, I found Daya and another teacher you'll meet later called Bank through italki, the sponsors of this video. So italki is this excellent website and app where you can tap into a global community of thousands of high-quality native-speaking teachers teaching over 150 different languages. Just pick the language you want to learn, look at the massive list of teachers available to you, and choose one that suits your schedule and your budget. It took me absolutely no time to find Daya and set up a quick trial lesson.
Italian has a really good phonetic, actually. Easy. However you're writing it, that's the way you're reading it. Exceptions made for 2 or 3 letters together, but it's melodic and it's really, really fluid when you try to speak it.
The great thing about italki is there are no subscriptions, no commitments. You just pay as you go, and lessons start at only $5. So millions of people are using italki to start their language learning journey. Why don't you? They've given me a special promo code, RobWords, where you can get $5 free with your first italki credit purchase of $10 or more. So click on the links in the description to find out more. Right, so cultural factors are clearly a major reason why some languages are considered particularly attractive. So the same must also be true for the other end of the spectrum, right? Well, let me launch into a quick defense of German as a language. I mean, you've probably seen those videos where people show how angry and aggressive German sounds compared with other languages.
Schmetterling!
But any language is going to sound abominable if you spit it in someone's face like they've just spilt your pint of Pilsner.
Fluffy cushion!
Can you honestly say, objectively, that Schmetterling, said normally, is a worse sounding word than butterfly? I mean, I think Schmetterling's kind of cute. It's sort of smushy and soft. Schmetterling. And the ling bit at the end is adorable, like a duckling. Ah. Or do you think perhaps, just bear with me here, perhaps the fact that Germany was basically the supervillain of the 20th century might have had some impact on how we view the country's language? The fact that it's the language of countless bad guys. Although, to be fair, Mark Twain was describing it as awful almost 150 years ago, but he was talking about what a pain it is to learn. So how can you get an idea of how attractive a language really is without these cultural elements clouding the picture?
It was a bit of a hassle in the beginning.
Niklas and his team set themselves a tough task. They wanted to find a way to ask lots of people from lots of different cultures what they thought about lots of different languages.
We were looking around for, I think, years almost, and trying different approaches. But then we stumbled upon this film, which was dubbed into hundreds of languages for what I assume is missionary reasons.
They were tales from the Bible, told in tongues from all over the world.
You know can try and big pillow God belong you.
The team played over 2,000 recordings from more than 200 languages to over 800 people from 3 groups.
So one was English first language speakers, the other one was Chinese first language speaker, Mandarin and Cantonese and some other varieties, and then also what we call Semitic speakers, so that would be Arabic and Hebrew in this case. And these 3 different rater groups are at least more representative of the world than just having English speakers as raters at least.
And what Niklas and the team did was ask them to rate each language out of 100 for how much they liked the sound of them. So let's get to it. What did they find?
So let's talk about the results. And down to the bottom line of it, are some languages objectively more attractive than others?
Yes and no. I mean, the raters used a scale from 1 to 100. And in the final results, the estimates were about 35 for the least pleasant language to 42 in the most pleasant language. So the range there is pretty small. We did find some patterns when it comes to this. There were more agreement when it came to the disliked languages than the liked languages for some reason.
Oh, that's interesting. So there are languages that are potentially intrinsically unattractive.
There are 2 points to this. The first point is that the 2 languages that were in the bottom was Chechen and Avar, and these are Caucasian languages. And they are quite famous for including a lot of hard to pronounce consonants.
So just have a listen to these. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts on that and indeed any of this in the comments below. The team also found another interesting pattern among the languages rated the lowest. Tonal languages, on average, scored lower than non-tonal languages. So tonal languages are languages like Mandarin Chinese, where every syllable has to be said with a certain inflection in your voice.
Ma, 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 ma.
Otherwise, what you're saying won't make sense. But it seems those tones maybe don't make for a particularly mellifluous language. And that wasn't just the view of speakers of non-tonal languages like English.
This effect was strongest for the Chinese group.
That's interesting.
Yes, all of the Chinese languages that we used were tonal languages. So if you have a language, in this case Chinese are mostly Mandarin speakers, and they actually have tones themselves in their mother tongue, then they don't like other tonal languages, and that's interesting.
One of those other tonal languages is Thai, a language I do not know very well, but my new pal Bank does.
So to say hello in Thai, we say สวัสดี.
สวัส ดี
สวัสดี
He's a Thai teacher and did his best, completely in vain, to try to teach me the 5 tones of
Ga.
Thai.
กา กา
ga, ga.
Perfect.
And presumably ga means something different to ga, ga, ga. I'm sounding like Lady Gaga. Ga, ga.
So embarrassing.
Most of my students, they say, oh, it's just like sing a song. You have to go up and down, low, middle, down and up, something like that.
So you might have to think of it as like a song when you speak it, but that doesn't appear to make it music to the ears.
Maybe the reason why you find it less melodic, if that's the reason, for example, is because there's so many differences happening on every syllable, basically. So, I mean, this is just a theory, but it could have to do with the same thing as if you have a lot of different consonants in a cluster and then a vowel and lots of different consonants as well, then you get a very chopped up way of how it sounds like.
Okay, enough of this negativity. What did Niklas and his team learn about the languages we really like? Well, what they found was the biggest factor in whether or not a language was considered beautiful was not actually what it sounded like, but whether or not the listener recognized it. The people taking part, on average, rated a language over 12 points higher out of 100 if they thought they already knew what it was, even though actually they were wrong about what the language was half of the time. For example, the 3 highest rated languages for the Chinese speaking group were Mandarin, English, the language the study was conducted in, and Japanese.
For the Semitic speakers, there were Spanish, English and Italian, 3 widely known and recognised languages. Arabic was 4th, incidentally. And for the English speakers, guess what came top? Why, English, of course. Second was our friend Italian, and third was Jamaican Patois, also known as Jamaican Creole English.
So the researchers tried to account for that familiarity bias by discounting languages that too many of the participants recognised. But even then, that bias was hard to escape.
There were some Creole languages or pidgin languages that were rated quite high, and these are usually based on English or French.
For example, a surprise frontrunner was a language called TOK PISIN, which is spoken in Papua New Guinea. It's a Creole, which is a language usually formed when traders or colonialists arrive in a country, in this case from England, and their language mixes with the local way of speaking. In fact, the name TOK PISIN ultimately means talk business, and here's how it sounds.
Taimoli kalabusim John Pinis, Jesus, ikamap long district Galilee, na iwalk long out him good news belong God. Emi tokolsem.
So you might not have heard it before, but English has undoubtedly left its mark there.
Then you, of course, have a very high familiarity bias, even though you try to control for it, because many of the words you will recognize, and maybe the raters couldn't recognize the exact language. Like, oh, this sounds like a strange type of English or something, so no, I don't recognize it.
The familiarity bias also comes into play when we look at how German did. So the short answer is not great, but our theory that cultural factors are at play seems to bear out. German was so widely recognised that they couldn't get a fair, non-biased score for it. However, they did find that other, rarely recognised languages did better than German, despite having a lot of the characteristics that people say they hate about German. Languages like its Germanic cousin Icelandic.
Veður austan og norðaustan gola eða kaldi en stinningskaldi eða hvasst með suðausturströndinni.
So maybe we can stop picking on German for a bit? Dankeschön. As well as redeeming Deutsch, at least a little bit, the experiment produced some additional side effects. What Niklas and his team had also incidentally done was create a test for which types of voices we like the sound of, irrespective of language. When they looked across the clips that did well, they found certain patterns.
We did find, for example, that female voices were more liked than male voices. Breathy voices were more liked than non-breathy voices, and when there was some residual music in the background, that was also liked. But it could be other factors that has to do with the voice that we couldn't really grasp. And if all the voice actors had that in one of the languages, for example, then maybe it's actually the voice that lowered the ratings rather than language.
Ah, so actually these additional factors might also be interfering with the scores the languages were given, as well as that familiarity effect that we were talking about. But for fun, let's just try something out. So if you wanted to maximize the score that a clip got, what characteristics would we give it? So we'd use a language that the listener is familiar to. We'd use a female voice, ideally a breathy one. Any other characteristics that you could
put some music in
throw
the
in there?
background.
Some music in the background.
Yeah, music in the background. And you would also probably, I think that you should also think about that even though it's the familiarity effect is very strong, you have to think about what that means, because familiarity can be, I've heard about this language, or I think I've heard about this language. But the languages you usually heard about are usually the ones which are famous or culturally influential, right? Like English. So you should, among the familiar languages, you should pick one which has a lot of say around the world, basically, and has a lot of exposure in movies and a lot of exposure. So we're back to English, right?
Hold on, so arguably the person in the world with the most perfect voice is Marge.
Oh, homie, take your shirt off again.
So you see, there are all kinds of factors that we need to take into account when we try to arbitrarily claim one language is beautiful and another is not. It's okay to think French and Italian are gorgeous and German is disgusting, but when we do, we have to realize that we're not being objective. There's obviously loads more work to be done to add to the findings of Niklas and his team, biases that still need to be accounted for, but nevertheless, I think the insights are fascinating.
This is the biggest study that has been done in this manner. It's all steps towards more understanding. There's never any final goal to anything. It's just understanding more and using that to understand the world more and more, basically.
Thanks so much to Niklas for talking us through things. If you've enjoyed this video, I think you'll like my one about misheard phrases or eggcorns. I think it's a fun one. Otherwise, maybe give this one a go. And please do subscribe. I have so much more to tell you about. If you do sign up to italki, I can recommend Dyer and Bank. They are both lovely people, and you're lovely for watching. Thanks.